Hello, everybody. The Elder Millennial here. I am back from the trip I had to go on this past weekend, and I know I promised that I would do a Batocera version 39 video when I got back. Uh, I had a little bit of an ordeal with this because I initially wanted to do a clean install, but then I started feeling extremely lazy and got to thinking about all the things that I might have to redo and have to remember how to do, and any manual edits I had made on the system to various config files. And I decided that upgrading would be the best path, although it seemed to have been the more problematic path. I initially went in to upgrade, and you can see here I am running version 39 now, and this is on my main PC. And I went in to do the normal upgrade, just like you normally would, just going updates and downloads. I always run stable, and you do the start update. And it almost immediately told me that I didn't have uh, enough space on the /boot partition. And I thought, well, maybe some other stuff's just taking up too much room, stuff that'll get replaced by the new update. So I remounted the boot partition as read write. I moved a few things out of it. Didn't want to delete anything, just moved it out somewhere else. And, after a little bit of trial and error to figure out exactly what was necessary there for the updater to function, I was able to get it past that point where it was actually like downloading the update. And then I learned that the problem was that once it's downloaded and it tries to extract everything onto the boot partition, there just was not enough space on the partition. Even if there were nothing else there, there was still not enough space to hold the new update. And this is a problem I think a lot of people are going to run into who tend to upgrade Batocera instead of doing clean installs. Because I've been upgrading for a few versions, and just the size of that boot partition has remained pretty small, and it just isn't enough. So I ended up booting to gparted and resized the partition on that disk and made it larger, borrowed some space from elsewhere at the end of the disk, and made that partition larger. And that went okay, except now, because I probably where it's looking to boot from, uh, I'm sure I moved the boundaries of that a little bit, messing with the partition, so Batocera would no longer boot. So the next thing I had to do was download the Batocera. Uh, Actually, I think I downloaded the Batocera 38 image and put that on a USB stick and booted from that. And when it booted up, I saw all my consoles, everything, all my systems, all my games were there, ROMs. Like, because everything was still there. All the config was still there. It just couldn't boot. So I needed the USB to boot. Um, Once I got back into it, I just went ahead and ran, now that I've expanded the size of the boot partition, I ran the updater like I normally would, and everything seemed to work fine. At that point, I was able to disconnect the USB, and I could boot into version 39 just fine without it. Things seemed to be back to normal. Everything seemed to be okay. Then it was time to just start addressing little issues. The first one I encountered, which was more than a little issue actually, was that after the Batocera 39 like splash video played, I was just getting a black screen. At that point, I thought maybe it's related to secure boot. So I went into my BIOS settings, and I don't use secure boot. It was disabled. Um, so I looked for anything related to it that might not be explicitly disabled, and I found an AMD setting called FTPM, and I think it was set to like auto or something, and I set it to be explicitly disabled. And I tried booting the system again, and one of the things I think I did around the same time was I had taken a backup of my user data folder, just the whole thing. So I copied all of that back over onto the version 39 system. So all of my configurations for version 38 were now going to be in place, overriding anything that might be new in 39. And what I found was now sometimes it would boot up properly, and other times it would boot to a black screen. It was very intermittent. It was almost like there was a race condition happening, and sometimes the black screen was the winner, sometimes the proper boot up was the winner. And what seems to have really done the trick was I went into uh, settings here in the front end developer options. I had this set to max 1920 by 1080, and I changed it to this 1920 by 1080 60 hertz because I noticed that it was detecting my TV as 120 hertz, which I don't really. I'm fine at 1080p 60 hertz gaming for the most part. So and I thought that's what I had the TV set to. I'm not even sure why it was getting 120 hertz, but it was detecting 120 hertz, and I thought that might be related. So I set it to this 1920 by 1080 60 hertz, and it seems to be booting up every time fine now. So that was like the first major hurdle. I'm not going to show everything I did. I'm just going to kind of talk about some of it because uh, I don't know how related to the problems it was. It's just what I happened to do at the time that seemed to fix it. Um, for example, my PS Vita games would not launch from the emulation station menu. But if I hit F1 in Batocera and clicked on applications and launched Vita 3K from there, I could launch the games. So I ended up looking at the log files, the Vita 3K.log and the ES launcher standard output and standard error logs. And it was complaining in a particular file about a merge directories function not being defined. So I ended up going into that file and just commenting out the line that had merge underscore directories in it. And after I did that, it seemed to launch fine. I checked the same file earlier today, and the line is now uncommented. So at some point it got uncommented, but everything still launches. But for like a brief period of time, and it may have been before I copied my old config over. I don't know. But at some point, at some point, commenting that line out made the Vita games launch properly, and they still continue to work fine. So the big, the elephant in the room is Switch emulation, and I guess also 3DS emulation, because when it comes to Switch emulation, we all know that last week, um, and as of now, the Yuzu emulator is a dead project. It can no longer be worked on by the Yuzu team. They also worked on the Citra 3DS emulator, which is also now a dead project. The GitHub repositories for both have been removed. A lot of people, though, were able to clone that and have uploaded the repositories to the internet, along with things like these standalone versions of the latest builds of the emulators. the app images for the emulators. So my thoughts on it are probably in the next version of Batocera, I imagine that there will not be any Citra. There definitely won't be any Yuzu, but they didn't include that now. But I don't think they will include Citra at all, with it being a dead project. So I think it's important now more than ever to make sure that you are backing up your entire user data folder structure somewhere else, somewhere safe, so you can refer to it. The reason for that is to get something like Citra or Yuzu working in the future. Um, it'll obviously be older versions. It'll be whatever versions you had, since there are going to be no new versions of those emulators going forward. But you should still be able to get them working in future versions of Batocera after they're dropped. But I think an important part of that is going to be making sure that you have a backup of that user data folder in which those emulators are already installed and working. That way you can look and see what the layout was, file structure, where things go, what you need, and be able to reproduce that from scratch on a system that does not include them. So I think that's going to be real important. Backups are going to be really important going forward. For me, another issue I face is that for whatever reason, Citra was not working for me on version 39. And again, I had to go to the logs and was able to determine that there was a file missing. Basically, the libretro emulator for it was missing. The Citra underscore libretro.so file. So I was able to just Google that, found a version of it online, and I placed that in Batocera to the user libretro folder. And then Citra started working just fine. I don't know why that was missing for me. I don't think Citra is missing from version 39. It may have just been something that happened on my system for whatever reason, and not necessarily something everybody's going to face, but it is something I ran into, and I just needed that file in there. Another issue was none of my PS2 games would launch because I forgot that version 39, I think the expected location for your PS2 BIOS files is now going to be user data BIOS PS2, and they're going to be in that PS2 folder. Before, I just had them all under the BIOS folder, but I just moved things into PS2 and it started working. When it comes to Switch, odds are you probably saw my video on how, or someone else's on how to install Switch emulation onto Batocera, and it was real easy because you just run a curl command, which would download a script and run it, and you'd get Yuzu and Ryujinx set up. And it was pretty much the go-to way of setting up Switch emulation on Batocera. I'm pretty sure that's not going to work anymore, at least not for Yuzu, as it's a dead project. I don't think that's going to install it anymore. Might still work for Ryujinx. But if you already have it installed under your ports, you'll have this Switch updater. Make sure you've made a backup of your user data folder, or at the very least of user data system switch. Because inside the user data system switch folder are going to be two app images you need to have backed up. And that's going to be yuzu.appimage and yuzu.ea.appimage. Because now, if you come in here today and run the switch updater, it is going to break your existing Yuzu installation on Batocera. I believe it'll still update Ryujinx, but it will absolutely break Yuzu. And the fix is going to be to copy those two app image files back into the user data system switch folder. But to do that, you have to have them backed up somewhere and then copy them back over. That's if you run this. And if you're using Ryujinx, you may still want to run this for now. Just be advised that it will break Yuzu. So you will need to do some manual intervention after running it to get Yuzu to function again. Most everything else seemed to work fine for me. Visual Pinball. Now, remember, I'd done a video talking about how version 39 was going to move Visual Pinball to like a per game or per table folder structure where each table is in a folder and it has everything it needs, the ROM file if it's a pin MAME game. Just everything would be in one single folder that table needed. And you can check the wiki for like the folder layout that you'll need. But I have not done that yet. I'm still using the old setup the way I had it. And now that I've copied all my version 38 configs over, my vpinballx.ini file has the pin main path set to just the equal sign and nothing else, which is the old way, not the new way, which is fine. But I still couldn't launch vpinball games. So what I did was I came in and then I just hit the select button here. So these options would affect every table. And under advanced system options, go down to this per table folder. For me, this was turned on. I needed to turn that off. And then once I did that, my tables were able to launch again. I think that's most of the issues. The only other minor annoyance I've run into is with any games in which I'm using Yuzu. Let's see. I don't think I've done it with Mario Kart. This one probably won't affect you. I don't use like auto controller config with Yuzu. I have that turned off, and I have created profiles, which back, in an older version of Batocera, I went in, I created this profile. I called it default. It's actually like DFLT, and I assigned it to every game that I use with Yuzu. And now I'm pressing L and R and nothing's happening. So here's what I've been doing on just sort of a case-by-case basis. Is I'll just hit escape after I've launched the game. And I'll go up to the emulation menu. And I'll do configure current game. I'll lose track of my mouse. Okay, there we go. I'll go to input profiles. And see, it's already set. It knows it's there, so I don't change anything. I just hit apply and OK. And I guess that puts whatever it needs back into the config files for the game. Go back to full screen here. And now when I press L and R, it works. And if I quit the game and go back into it, it still works. So it's like a one-time thing I need to do. It's not a big deal, just kind of a minor inconvenience for whatever reason. And that's probably one you won't run into. I was just real particular on, I had a bunch of different controllers I was using with different profiles, and that's just how I ended up doing it. And for whatever reason, I guess something is just missing from like each game's INI file now after the upgrade. I don't know. But just going into it once like that after launching the game and hitting apply on the input config screen seems to fix it permanently for that game. So, like I said, just a minor inconvenience, not a major deal. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. I didn't hit a huge number of problems, I don't think. I'm glad that I had a backup of my configs from version 38. And like I said, I strongly suggest going forward, especially that you have a full backup of your user data folder somewhere else, somewhere safe, where nothing's going to happen to it. Like I said, for no other reason than to be a reference point for getting some of these emulators up and running. Like, honestly, I would be shocked if any version of Citra is available in Batocera version 40. I don't see it being there anymore, and we're all gonna want it. And I think it'll be important to make sure that we have access to how we had it set up, so we can move things over and at least get to where we were on a previous version of Autosera in the newer version. I think it's going to be real important that, now we realize that, things can happen and these emulators can go away. So, how do we at least get to that last known good point going forward that we were at with those emulators while we wait for hopefully new ones to come out and developers to take on the gargantuan task of making these emulators. So, yeah, that's pretty much kind of been what my experience was. If you had different issues, tell your stories down below in the comments with your Batocera 39 upgrade. If you're still having issues, post your problem. Either myself or someone else that comes along to this channel might see it and have an answer for you. So just want to get the conversation started down there on, what your experiences have been with the new version of Batocera. And so far, I'm liking it. For the most part, it doesn't seem to be hugely different from 38 for me. Um, Things like the Play emulator, it is a newer version of Play. A couple of games I've tested, I don't really see a huge difference. Maybe you will, but again, I kind of chalk that one up to being the Play emulator is still pretty in its pretty early stages. So I think it's an emulator that'll eventually get there for those Namco games. It's just not quite where we all want it yet. Um, but I think it will eventually get there um, as development continues on it. But yeah, that's like I said, that was my experience. Tell me about yours below. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. And I will catch you on the next one.